Hi there and welcome. This is Jennifer McGuire. I think one of the best ways to give a nice kind of professional finished look to a card is to use heat embossing. It's not expensive and it's something that we can do with pretty much any stamps we have. Well, today I'm going to give some tips on heat embossing, especially when you're making multiple cards. So during the holidays, a lot of people make a lot of the same card design, but shy away from heat embossing because they think it's hard to create a lot of cards using heat embossing. But I'm going to share some tips today that hopefully will keep you from feeling that way. I've done mass-produced cards with heat embossing in the past, and it really isn't that bad, and the results are definitely worth it. In this video, I'm going to be using the Misti stamping tool. However, you could use a regular acrylic block. I just find this tool is very helpful, but keep in mind you can do all of these techniques with a regular acrylic block. So this is the Misti stamping tool. It is great for getting perfect placement and stamping every time, and it's really helpful if you're doing mass production of a card or making multiples of the same design. So I have some 5.5 by 4.25 pieces of white cardstock. I have several pieces cut here. And I'll be using the Mama Elephant Twinkle Town stamp set. This is a new stamp set that you can build all these images together to create a great scene. The first image I'm going to use from this set is the branch, and then I'll build out from there. So here's the branch, and I'm just placing it right down, stamp side down, onto my white cardstock, exactly where I want it to stamp. And I have my white cardstock pushed right into the corner of the Misti tool. Now I'm going to close the door on it, and that transfers that stamp onto the door, and now it'll perfectly stamp every time I close the door onto the paper. Now, since I'm doing heat embossing, I think it's really important to use an anti-static powder tool to prevent your embossing powder from getting stuck where you don't want it. So you'll see me use that every time I stamp in this video. I think it's really important and it really keeps your card looking nice and clean. So I'm inking up the image with Versamark ink, closing the door onto my paper, and that will give me a perfect stamp image. I don't have to worry about it wiggling, and I know that the placement is just right. Now I can move on to the next paper, brush the powder tool on it, ink it up, and stamp once again. Now I want to end up with 3 or 4 cards in the end here. So I'm actually starting out with 5 pieces of paper. I think it's always good to start out with extras because in case you mess one up, you don't have to go back and go through it all again. I think it's always good to build in that little buffer for any mistakes that you may make. It makes the whole process less frustrating. So you can see how quickly you can ink up stamps and stamp each image. Now notice I'm stamping with a clear sticky ink. It's called Versamark ink. And luckily this ink does not dry all that fast. So I can go through and stamp all 5 pieces at once, and then I can move on to the embossing powder after that. You don't need to stamp, put on the powder, stamp the next one, put on the powder. As long as you move quick enough, you don't have to worry about it. If your Versamark ink pad is super old, you may want to get a re-inker or replace it, but I found those Versamark ink pads last for a long time. So after I've stamped all of them with the Versamark ink, I am adding some Hero Arts copper embossing powder. I thought it'd be fun to use copper instead of a brown embossing powder, and to be honest, I don't have a brown embossing powder, so this worked out really well. This is a newer color from Hero Arts. I think it's beautiful. Now I work on a coffee filter. I think it's really easy to pour that embossing powder back into the bottle when I'm ready. So you can see how quickly I went and added the embossing powder on all 5 of these stamped pieces. You don't have to worry about the ink drying unless you move really slow. You want to do it right away. Another tip is to keep a Swiffer dusting cloth on hand. So if you do spill some powder where you don't want it, you can brush it away really quickly. And you'll see me do that a few times here in the video. Also, you want to make sure your heat gun is good and hot. Let it heat up for several seconds before you bring it to your paper, and that will keep you from overheating your paper and causing it to warp. So now I did all of my stamping, then I added embossing powder to all of the pieces, and then I heat set them all at once. And that saves you a lot of time over doing each of those steps per piece. Okay, so now it's time to add the little pine needles. So I've put that piece of that white stamp piece into my Misti right into the corner. I put the pine needle stamp exactly where I want it to stamp. I'm closing the door on it, and now I know it'll stamp perfectly in the same place every time. Again, I'm brushing it with my anti-static powder tool, inking my stamp up with Versamark ink, and stamping it onto each of the pieces of paper. Now, if you don't have an anti-static powder tool, I know some people have created their own with cornstarch or baby powder or even a dryer sheet, but I really think it's worth the investment to get an anti-static powder tool. I have had mine for years and it hasn't even come close to running out, so it's a nice investment that will last you a while. So I've stamped the pine needles with Versamark ink on all of my pieces here, and now I am adding some dark green embossing powder. Now, embossing powders are inexpensive and they last you for a very long time. However, if you don't have them in a bunch of colors, you could instead stamp all of these images with a colored pigment ink and put clear embossing powder on each layer. That will give you the same look. However, I really think the results are better if you use colored embossing powders. If you have another crafty friend, you could buy some embossing powders and split the jars. They really do go a long way. Now, I decided to go in and color in these heat embossed images with a little bit of marker. It didn't take long. All I did was use a brown marker for inside the branch just to give it a nice finished look. And then I used a lighter green marker to color in some of the pine needles. Not many of the pine needles are open, so this didn't take long. But you can see the difference between this piece and the piece over to the left. This looks much more finished and more solid. You could do this design with dye ink also. You could stamp all these images with dye ink and then stamp on top of them with Versamark ink, and then add clear embossing powder. But again, I think the best thing to do is to just invest in a few different colors of embossing powder. They're only a few dollars a jar. People often ask what my favorite embossing powders are. For the basic whites, silvers, golds, and such, I like Hero Arts. Then for other colors, I like Ranger. They have great quality embossing powders. And then I also like Wow embossing powders. They are smaller jars, so the price point is really good, and they have an incredible number of options of specialty embossing powders in lots of different colors. So you'll see me use some from each of those companies in this video. Any of them are really good. Now this time I stamped the Versamark ink for the ornament on all of the panels, but I'm going to use two different colors of embossing powder on this image. I'm using a little spoon to apply Hero Arts gold embossing powder to the ornament itself. Then you'll see me brush away some of that gold from the top of the ornament, where I'm just going to add the silver. So you can actually apply multiple colors at once. It doesn't have to be perfect. It'll all look good when it's heat embossed in the end. But again, I've stamped the ornament on all of the panels. Then I go through and put the embossing powder on all of the panels, and then I heat set all the panels at once. This saves a lot of time. There you can see where I have the gold and silver together on the one image. Okay, so for the string that ties the ornament to the tree or to the branch, I wanted to make sure I stamped this straight every time, and at this point I thought this would be faster to use without the Misti, so I'm just using my T-ruler and a pencil just to draw a straight line that I'll stamp right on top of. This time I wanted black for the string. Now the only time that I think it's better to not use a colored embossing powder is when it comes to black. I think black embossing powder is really hard to work with. Some people are okay with it. It may work for you. But I think you always get better results if you stamp with a good black pigment ink than clear emboss it. I like to use VersaFine black pigment ink. It's a very, very good black ink, very solid black, and then put clear embossing powder on it. I find black embossing powder tends to get everywhere and it doesn't give a nice solid image. So my rule of thumb is if I want a color heat embossed image, I use color embossing powders, except for black. For black, I stamp with black VersaFine ink and use a clear embossing powder. The results will be much better. So I'm stamping this string on top of each of those little pencil lines I did. I don't even have to worry about erasing those pencil lines because they're hidden by the black ink. You could have used the Misti stamping tool to get good placement on each of these, but I thought since this was small, I didn't need to worry about it and could be quick to do with an acrylic block. I also stamped the little bow image on the top of the ornament with that black VersaFine ink and added the clear embossing powder. So that stamp set that I used, the Twinkle Town stamp set, came with little town images you could stamp inside the ornament, but I decided to instead stamp a greeting. So this is the Mama Elephant Jingle Greetings. I really like this sentiment up in the top corner, and I thought it would fit perfectly in that ornament. In fact, several of the greetings in this set fit in this ornament nicely. So I'm going to put my paper into my little Misti tool, place that sentiment exactly where I want it. Now you notice that the Mary kind of hangs out the side over there to the left, the top of the M. So I have a Post-it note here that I am going to put onto my background to mask off that side. So each time that I stamp this, I don't have to worry about it stamping outside of the ornament. I think I could have let it stamp outside of the ornament, but I don't know. I'm uptight about some of these things when it comes to stamping, so I decided to go ahead and mask it. So I have my Post-it note as a mask. Now I can ink up that stamp and then close it right onto the paper, and I don't have to worry about that little bit stamping outside of the ornament. My first instinct was to create a mask around this ornament, to put around it so that I didn't have to worry about it stamping outside. But you don't always need to make a mask. Sometimes just a little post-it note placed in the right place is all you need to do. So now I can go ahead and stamp this on each of the panels. Now I think here you can see the advantage to using the Misti stamping tool. However, if you don't have the tool, you could stamp each of these steps with an acrylic block with no problem. This time I'm adding some Ranger red, I think it's red geranium embossing powder to the stamped images. Remember, if you stamp all of them at once, you can add the embossing powder with no problem as long as you don't leave it to sit for a long time. That ink should stay wet long enough to hold on to the embossing powder after a bit. And then after doing each, I can go ahead and heat it with my heat gun. It's always good to also have a very thin paintbrush on hand that you don't use for anything else to brush away any powder that gets where you don't want it. So we're in the home stretch on these cards here. We finished our stamping. Now I wanted to show you how I did that treatment to the edge of the red note card that you see there on the left. You'll see there's some piercing on it. I did this with the new Mama Elephant Fine Trimmings border dies. Now these are 3 individual dies that are still connected. They come connected, but you can use wire clippers to clip them apart. I just kept them connected so that I can do all 3 at once. And I'm going to run this through my die cut machine right up against the crease line on this 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch red note card that I created. This is just going to create a fun little treatment, a little bit of interest to the note card that peeks out from beside our stamp panel. So if you see here, there is a faux stitched scalloped edge. Then there's also these tiny little holes that it pierced. If you run a piercing tool right along that, it pops out all of those little pierced dots. I just love the look of those little holes. It shows whatever color's inside of your card through it. And then it also has a border that just does a faux stitched straight line. I just thought that would be fun peeking out next to our stamp panel. I trimmed the white stamp panels down to be about 3.5 inches wide. And I'm going to glue that onto the front of our note cards right up against the outside edge. I also wanted a thin glitter cardstock line right up against the edge of our stamp panel. So I have this glitter paper from, believe it or not, it's from Tim Holtz. And what's great about it is silver and gold come in a pack together, and it's self-adhesive. It has adhesive on the back already. So I use my trimmer to cut a very thin strip. Then all you have to do is peel off the back and stick it right onto your card. It's nice and thin, so you can add it to a card without much bulk. And I just love the finishing touch it gives. It die cuts nicely also. And the last thing I wanted to do to these cards is create some falling snow in the background. The product I'm using for this is a snow marker. This product's been around for a long time. There's also a liquid applique, but I really like that the snow marker is bright white. Every time I use it, I just wipe the tip clean, and then I squeeze a bunch of it out onto some scrap paper. So I just press the tip into the pen. It's like a paint pen, just to kind of squeeze some out onto some scrap paper. Then every time I bring it to my paper, I dip it into that little puddle that I created. The reason I do this is so that each of the dots I put on my card is thicker. The more you put down on your card, the thicker it is, the more it will bubble up when we heat set it. So that's why I like to put a little bit extra down. After I've quickly put these little dots all over the background on one of the cards, you just bring a heat gun to it. And this is where the magic happens. Each of those little dots will bubble up and create these really fun very dimensional little dots on your background. So you'll see it happen as the heat is applied. Now these bumps kind of remind me of little pieces of styrofoam added to your card. They aren't firm when you're done, so they have a little bit of softness to them, but they actually I found they hold up through the mail pretty well. So I think this is a great way to add the look of snow to a card. Really fun, inexpensive, and something that you can use on a lot of cards. So there you have it. I actually ended up with 4 cards, but Lila really liked it, so she took one of them. So I have 3 to show you here. They're all the same. I hope that these tips on heat embossing, especially when you're doing mass production, are very helpful to you. If you're looking for the products that I used in this video, I linked them in my YouTube description below, or you can find a more complete list over at my blog at jennifermcguireinc.com, where I am part of a fun blog hop with giveaways. I appreciate you watching, and I hope you'll stop back by again soon. Have a great day.